The crystals of the chandelier trembled subtly, reflecting a light that seemed to mock Claire's pain. Her fingers, as delicate as rose petals, held a bouquet of white flowers, a silent cry of purity amid the chaos of her existence. The dining room of the Blanc restaurant breathed elegance. Every detail had been meticulously planned, every napkin folded, every piece of silverware placed just so. Claire was the architect of that night, yet she felt like a ghost, invisible in her own creation. At the center of the room stood Margaret. Her mother-in-law radiated power. She didn't need to speak, her glances cut like sharp blades. Her smile was a dagger disguised as politeness. Claire watched her, feeling each second stretch into an eternity of rejection. Jonathan, her husband, stood beside his mother. His posture screamed omission. He would not defend her. He never had. The guests laughed. Waiters moved between tables with glasses of champagne. The soft music of a violin seemed to mock the tension growing in Claire's chest. "You don't belong here," the eyes said, without words, but loud enough for Claire to almost hear them. Her black dress, chosen with such care, now felt like a fragile armor against the silent cruelty of that family. Every inch of fabric cried out her loneliness. She approached the maitre d' with determined steps. Her voice, when she spoke, was a whisper of steel. "I want to cancel the reservation." The man hesitated, not because of the importance of the request, but because of the intensity in her eyes. Claire didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply decided. At that moment, Margaret turned. Her eyes met Claire's. No greeting, no acknowledgement, just pure disdain. Claire felt the world stop. She remembered when she met Jonathan, young, in love, full of dreams, how naive she had been to believe that love would be enough, that she would be accepted, that she would become part of that family. Years of silence, years of trying, years of being treated like an intruder in her own life. The music played on, glasses clinked, and Claire decided this would be the last night she would be invisible. With an elegant gesture, she laid the bouquet of white flowers on a nearby table, one final act of purity before her transformation. No one would notice her leaving, but everyone would feel her absence. The restaurant door opened. Claire stepped out, free, and the night, at last, began. The city slept in shades of gray and deep blue. Claire walked, her steps echoing on the empty sidewalks like a melody of liberation. Each step was a declaration, each breath a sigh of relief. Michael's café appeared like a lighthouse in the night. Bright windows, a promise of comfort. Claire pushed the door open. The bell chimed softly, announcing her arrival like a shared secret. Michael was behind the counter. His eyes lit up when he recognized her. Not as someone's wife, not as the rejected daughter-in-law, but as Claire, the woman he had known before life tried to shatter her dreams. "Tea," she said. It wasn't a request. It was a silent plea for understanding. He prepared the drink with precise movements. Each gesture, a memory of years past, of interrupted conversations, of unfulfilled promises. Claire began to tell her story, not with bitterness, but with a clarity sharp as a crystal blade. She spoke of the dinners where she was invisible, of whispered criticisms, of looks that made her feel smaller than a grain of sand. Michael listened, not to judge, not to fix, just to understand. "I lost myself," she said. "In every attempt to be perfect, I kept losing pieces of who I was." The tears didn't come. The pain was too deep for superficial tears. Michael placed his hand over hers. A simple gesture, but it meant everything. Understanding, respect, hope. The night went on. The café, once noisy, had become a sanctuary of confidences. Claire felt each word as a layer being stripped away. She was no longer the broken woman. She was someone rebuilding herself. "And now?" Michael asked. Claire looked out the window. The city was beginning to awaken. Lights turned on. Streets that once looked like dark alleys now shone with possibility. "Now I choose myself," she replied. A smile was born on her lips. Not a smile of victory, a smile of rebirth. The tea was growing cold in the cup, but the warmth of her newfound resolve heated every inch of her being. The night had ended, and with it, a chapter of her life. A new story was beginning, without asking permission, without fear. Just Claire. A smile bloomed on her lips. It wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of rebirth. The tea had gone cold in the cup, but the warmth of her newfound determination heated every inch of her being. The night had ended, and with it, a chapter of her life. A new story was beginning, without asking permission, without fear, just Claire. The door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the house like a poorly contained thunderclap. Jonathan walked into the room with heavy steps, his face flushed, his eyes burning with barely concealed fury. Claire was on the couch, legs crossed, a forgotten book in her lap. She had been expecting him, and everything that would come with his arrival. "Have you lost your mind?" His voice cut through the air, full of disbelief and disappointment. "You cancelled my mother's party, in front of everyone." Claire didn't answer immediately. She looked up, resting her gaze on her husband as if seeing him for the first time. A heavy silence settled between them, not a pause, but an accusation. Jonathan went on. "Do you have any idea what you did? The embarrassment, the shame, the scene. They said you left without saying a word, as if I had never even been there." Claire's voice was calm, but it carried a strength he didn't recognize. "Do you know what it's like to be in a place you built yourself and still be treated like an outsider?" He shook his head, confused, frustrated. "Claire, it was her birthday. Did you really have to act like that?" "I did. Because no one ever acted for me." She stood up, her posture not defensive but clear. "Not even you." Jonathan took half a step back. "All of this, over one party?" Claire let out a dry laugh. "No. All of this is about years of silence, years of being disregarded, years of you leaving me alone in that house you all call a family." She walked slowly toward him, not with aggression, but with presence. "You didn't have to defend me, but you needed to see me." Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, nervous. "I tried to keep the peace, Claire, while I was fighting a war alone." The words dropped between them like a silent bomb. Jonathan felt a weight he had never carried before. For the first time, he had no ready-made response, no polished excuse, no comfortable escape. For the first time, he saw his wife not as the woman who endured, but as the woman who had risen. No elegant excuse, no comfortable escape. For the first time, he saw his wife not as the woman who endured, but as the woman who had risen. Claire stepped away, returning to the sofa with the same calm with which she had stood. "I don't want to fight or argue. I just want you to understand that I'm no longer willing to shrink myself to fit into this world you call a family." "You're saying you're leaving?" Jonathan's voice came out in almost a whisper, more fear than anger. "No," she replied. "I'm saying that if you want me to stay, you'll have to open your eyes. You'll have to choose between the comfort of silence and the responsibility of protecting me." He sank into the other sofa, stunned. They sat there in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that doesn't weigh, but transforms. Claire wasn't waiting for promises. She just wanted honesty. Jonathan finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "I saw the way my mother looked at you. I saw how she treated you. But I didn't know it hurt you that much." Claire took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on something beyond the room. "It hurts, every day. When she corrects me in front of others. When she pretends she didn't hear what I said. When she calls you back with a look, and you go without hesitation. It hurts, and even more when you pretend not to see it." He lowered his head. "I'm sorry." Claire stood again, walked to him, and touched his shoulder. "Apologies don't change the past, but they can create space for the future, if you truly want to fight with me." Jonathan looked into her eyes. For the first time, he wasn't a man torn between his mother and his wife. He was simply a man standing before the woman he had nearly lost. He nodded, slowly. "Then fight," she said. "But fight for me, not against her. For me." Jonathan gently pulled her into an embrace. Claire hesitated for a second, then gave in. The hug didn't erase the pain, but perhaps it was the first step towards something new, less painful, more real. That night, they slept side by side, but not like before. Between them now was a new awareness, uncomfortable, raw, but necessary. Claire knew nothing would change overnight, but she also knew that from that moment on, she would no longer accept less than she deserved. She had been invisible for too long. And now, Jonathan saw her. Finally. The smell of roasted meat and herbs lingered in the air. The table was set with austere elegance, white porcelain, starched napkins, tall crystal glasses. Claire felt like an ornament out of place, too beautiful to ignore, yet too out of sync to belong. Jonathan opened the door for her. He wore a light blue shirt, his hair still damp from the shower. There was something different in his eyes. Less hesitation, more resolve. For the first time in years, Claire felt Jonathan was truly present. Margaret was already seated, impeccable as always. She wore a pearl necklace and a beige dress that looked as if it had been ironed with fire. When she saw Claire, her eyes narrowed like blades. But she said nothing. Jonathan pulled a chair out for his wife. Claire sat down without smiling. She had decided not to fake kindness where there was no room for reciprocity. "Good evening, Mother," he said, his voice controlled. "Good evening," Margaret replied, looking only at her son. Claire remained silent, observing the familiar ritual unfold. Margaret spoke about a new store opening in town, about neighbors, about old recipes, all with the ease of someone who dominates the room. But Claire noticed how every phrase was carefully crafted to exclude her. Until suddenly, Margaret looked her straight in the eye. "You look tired, Claire. Have you been sleeping well?" Claire held her gaze. "I sleep better when I'm not pretending to be someone I'm not." The answer hovered in the air like a spark. Jonathan tightened his grip on his glass, his knuckles turning white. Margaret smiled, a dry, measured smile. "You've always wanted too much," she said. "You always wanted to be part of something that wasn't yours." Claire remained composed. "All I ever wanted was the minimum, to be treated like a human being." "Claire," Jonathan began, but she stopped him with a gentle gesture. She didn't need a shield. This was between her and Margaret. Margaret leaned slightly forward, like a serpent ready to strike. "You know what I think, that you feel rejected because you're insecure. Because deep down, you know you were never good enough for my son." Before Claire could respond, Jonathan slammed his hand on the table. Not in anger, but in resolve. "That's enough, Mother." The silence was absolute. Not the clink of silverware, not the noise of cars outside, not even the ticking of the wall clock. Nothing. Just the restrained breathing of three people who knew something had shifted. "She will be treated with respect," he continued, looking at his mother with a gaze Claire had never seen before. "Or we won't come to this house anymore." Margaret frowned. "Are you threatening me?" "No. I'm showing you the boundaries that should have existed from the beginning." Claire didn't smile, but inside, something settled. A piece that had always been out of place finally clicked into position. The tension was broken by an unexpected sound. Margaret getting up and walking toward the vegetable dish. She took the ladle and carefully served a portion onto Claire's plate. A gesture, a symbol. It wasn't affection, nor an apology, but it was, without doubt, the beginning of something. Claire accepted, not with gratitude, but with the awareness that some things are too significant to reject. For the rest of the meal, she said little, but her presence filled the room with a quiet strength. When they rose from the table, Jonathan discreetly took her hand. He didn't squeeze it, he simply held it, as if to say, "I'm here now." Outside, the sky was already dark, and a cold breeze blew. Claire took a deep breath, feeling the night like a balm. "You were firm," she said, as they walked to the car. "I was late," he replied, "but I won't fail you again." Claire looked straight ahead. She didn't fully trust yet, but she didn't need to. It was enough to know she wasn't alone this time. That night, as she lay down, she didn't count her wounds. For the first time in a long while, she counted her small victories, and knowing there was a place at the table, even if still uncomfortable, was enough for now. The next morning, Claire returned to the café. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered. It was a Monday morning, and the scent of fresh coffee mixed with vanilla wrapped around her like a familiar embrace. She hadn't come to escape, but to breathe. And because now, that place had a new meaning. Michael saw her first. He set down the tray he was carrying and gave her a wide smile. "You came back." Claire smiled back. "I didn't just come back. I finally arrived." They sat at the same table as the other night. A ray of sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the worn, warm wood. Michael placed a small round cake in front of her, with glossy syrup and a delicate message written in white icing. "For those who no longer settle for crumbs." Claire's eyes widened, surprised and moved. She laughed, bringing her hands to her mouth. "You're impossible. I just listened to everything you didn't say out loud and turned it into dessert," he replied, his tone light but respectful. Claire took a deep breath. She was happy. Not because she had defeated anyone, but because she had returned to herself. "How was dinner?" Michael asked, sipping his coffee. She told him everything, the stares, the silences, the provocations, but also about the moment Jonathan finally stood up for her. Not as a heroic act, but as a long overdue gesture of genuine love. "He's still learning," Claire said, "but for the first time, I'm not waiting for him to save me. I'm demanding to be treated as I deserve." Michael nodded. "And that changes everything." At that moment, the door opened again. Jonathan. No grand gesture, no flowers, just him, simple and present. Claire looked at Michael, who understood with just a glance and stepped away discreetly. Jonathan sat beside her. He looked calm, his eyes marked by sleepless nights and deep thoughts. "I talked to my mother," he said. "It wasn't easy. She said some harsh things, but I listened to everything. And for the first time, I spoke too. About you. About everything she refused to see." Claire said nothing. She waited. "She won't change overnight, but I will. Because now I see. You deserve more. And I want to be that more." She held the cup firmly, not looking at him. "Then don't let me fight alone." Jonathan moved a little closer, gently touching her hand. "I won't. Never again." Claire felt a warm wave rise in her chest. It wasn't forgiveness. It was reconstruction. And that takes time. But now there was ground for it. They left the cafe together, walking in silence. At home, Margaret held an old photo. In it, Jonathan was still a boy, standing beside his father. Her eyes were fixed on that past, for the first time without anger. Just thought. Claire hadn't defeated Margaret, and that no longer mattered. She had conquered herself. The fear of not belonging, the weight of always pleasing, the illusion that she needed others' approval to exist. She had stopped asking for permission. She didn't need to be loved. She just needed to stop asking for permission to exist. Have you ever felt like Claire, trying to fit into a place that never truly felt like yours? If this story moved you in any way, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next ones. Your support makes all the difference. Like, subscribe, and share. Help me grow.